Good morning guys. Two things to cover in this video. First up, a small announcement. I'm going to be going to the Warhammer Fest coming up in 1 week's time. Going to be there on the Sunday, hopefully with a little camera in hand, so I'm going to be doing a small interview with those happy Neocore folk. Looking forward to meeting them. If anyone has any questions in particular they would like asked, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. Now, I can't ask them 500 questions, but I'll see what I can do and I'll try and dig up a little bit of information for you guys, if you so wish. So, any information you're dying to hear more about, down in the comments below, let me know what you'd like to know. Moving on with the video now, today's topic is Grimdark. And why am I talking about the concept of Grimdark? Well, having looked at some of the older footage from 2015-2016 of Inquisitor Martyr, it made me really think about this, because the older footage had a little bit of a Grimdark sort of vibe to it. Now, for those of you that don't know what Grimdark is, it is, and this is a quote, this is a subgenre or a way to describe the tone, style or setting of a speculative fiction that is markedly dystopian or amoral or particularly violent. It's basically, it looks cool and in a dark way. That's the best way to summarise it. It's something many of us are used to the concept of. Warhammer is typically, especially 40k, is a little bit grimdark, sort of futuristic grimdark. If you just type the word into Google Images, you'll know instantly what I'm talking about. And I think it's something that Inquisitor Martyr seems to have moved away from a little bit. I don't think it's intentional. And it may just be because the game's still in development that we're sort of missing out on this. But for me at the moment, this feels like it's actually almost like a missing ingredient for the game. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time and talk about how I think they're missing out on this. So the first up, if we compare the old game footage to the new stuff, we can see straight away that the lighting settings within the very same space station that we're currently playing on is completely different. Now, we do know that they're redoing the lighting settings. We know that every map is getting a sort of a lighting overhaul. We don't know how much it's going to change. We don't know if they're just tweaking shadows, etc. But I think it's safe to say that looking at this old footage here, this actually looks, to me at least, a lot more 40k, a lot more like a space station that the Chaos have inhabited and you're exploring as such. And it's got that sort of grim sense of exploration, which I think is a really nice touch. They've got different lighting effects for different rooms, some being sort of red when there's alarms going off, etc. It just looks really nice. Compare that to the current map, which is borderline cartoonish. It's got a very limited palette, which I don't think does it many favours. It's obviously not gone for the stylised cartoon colours of Diablo 3, where everything's very vibrant and bold. But instead it's sort of somewhere in the middle, where it's gone for some quirky colours of a limited palette, but it's just not looking very grim. But let's move on anyway and talk about some of the other stuff that's missing. So, sound effects now I think are often something that sort of overlaps with this map issue. The sound effects currently in the game, let's take for example some of the weapon sound effects. So if we look at the auto gun, or rather the auto pistol in particular, the sound effects for this, now while I think they're okay, they're sort of borderline humorous. If you've ever had an ally with dual auto pistols running around shooting them, it makes you smile just because it sounds ridiculous, slightly obnoxious. It's not in any sense of the word grimdark. It doesn't feel very 40k because maybe because the rate of fire is so high, maybe because the pitch is so high. I can't put my finger on it, but I would say it's probably down to pitch. It sounds like something you've pulled out of a toy basket rather than something that really belongs in a sort of a futuristic 40k grimdark universe as such. Compare that to, let's say, the Bolter, which sounds a little bit better, but even then it's a little bit rattly. They all to me sound like weapons that would belong much better on an Orc rather than on an Imperial Inquisitor. So that's another thing to think about. So moving on from there, we have seen a few extra implemented death sounds, death animations, etc. Let's focus on the sounds to begin with. So current enemy sounds when hitting them, whacking them. Yeah, there's a couple of occasions when they squeak, they let out a grunt. It's a little bit better, but I feel like they've still not got as rich in terms of sounds as I would like. Take for example the enemy dreadnoughts. When they're chasing after you, seeing a giant enemy moving around but not hearing any mechanical footsteps or just grinding of gears as they're moving towards you, I feel does sort of trivialise them a little bit. It does make the enemies feel a little bit light. You obviously hear them roar the axe as they're smacking the floor. That's perfect, wouldn't change that at all. But enemies of big mobs of enemies rather, I feel there should be some more background noise, maybe just some casual grunting as they're moving towards you, but just something to let you know that you're fighting against a horde of scary monsters. And they're supposed to be scary, they're chaos after all, you know, they're supposed to be petrifying. Fair enough, you're an Inquisitor, but that doesn't mean that they don't make any sounds because you're an Inquisitor and you're standing in their proximity. And as well as these sorts of sound effects, obviously some more enemy scripted stuff would, I think, be useful. The text animations are they're okay, but I feel like in 2017 we've sort of moved away from text animations above the head. I know if you're having different audio or different commands rather for units to charge, hold ground, shoot grenades, it's kind of easier to read what the enemy are doing rather than just to listen out for it, because you're more than likely going to miss it. But I feel that some more enemy audio presence would be welcome, especially from our character as well, just some more grunts. Obviously, if they're going into scripted work, and I do believe they're currently recording some voiced stuff, then, well, there's got to be a lot of it so it doesn't feel too repetitive, but I do feel it would make the game feel a little bit richer and add to the sort of the grimdark nature of things. Now, moving on from there, the other thing I really think takes away from this sort of grimdark setting is the enemy death animations at the moment. Now, obviously quite a few of them are still a bit balked, so when I whack someone with a power hammer and they sort of just disintegrate into the floor as if they're the Wicked Witch from the West and someone poured water on them, sometimes these animations do not sync up, and that obviously is just, it's alpha footage, it's a bug, that's fine. But generally I do think the ragdoll physics still need a little bit of tweaking. They're better. When you hit someone with a power hammer now, you hear a little bit of a crunch. And that's nice. For this sort of game, you need to hear a sort of a wet, disgusting crunch that feels like you're ripping into flesh. It's Warhammer. We want a little bit of a visceral connection with the game, in terms of visuals, in terms of audios. And currently I think the ragdoll physics, in some situations, are still a little bit lackluster. The Chaos Space Marines in particular, the Nurgle ones, they seem to just do their own thing when you kill them. Sometimes you'll shoot them with a, fully charged bolt of plasma, and they just sort of stand there and then slowly fall to their knees into the floor. You kind of feel like they should be shot back a few feet. Obviously, you've got to be careful with how far you're throwing Chaos Space Marines. They're quite heavy people, but I think that some tweaks are probably needed. Now, guys, I want to know what you feel about Grimdark. Is Grimdark something that this game needs? I've been throwing around and splashing around some older footage. Granted, guys, that this is really old. This is like 2015 stuff made from an old demo. But I think the visuals here, in some respects, look really good. Obviously, the gameplay, if you look down at the comments, go on the GameSpot video, I'll link it in the description. Go on the comments. People hated the look of the game combat, so I do appreciate that there was a little bit, or has been a few comments about, fewer enemies looks a bit nicer, it feels a bit better to me. You've got to take into account though that this had a 50-50 dislike ratio, so clearly there was a lot of people looking at this footage that were just bored watching it. But visually, I think we can all agree that it looked healthy, it looked good, it looked dark, looked grimdark in particular. Guys, remember Warhammer Fest. If anyone's there, feel free to hit me up, add me on Twitter. My handle is the same as my name, Airsick Hydra. So if you want to catch up with me, I'll be there on Sunday, lunchtime-ish, early afternoon. And feel free to give us a holler on Twitter, send us a tweet. We'll meet up somewhere, hang out. I'll be at the NeoCore booth probably for an hour or so. I'm going to milk those guys for every bit of information I can. And once again, do not forget, down in the comments below, any information you'd like me to ask them while I'm there. I'll see what I can do. Guys, take care, have a great weekend, or have a great week even, and see you around.